Picture this: a Roman emperor fighting as a gladiator in the Colosseum, convinced he's the reincarnation of Hercules. Another emperor tries to make his horse a government official. And one poor guy gets assassinated while literally taking a bathroom break during a war campaign. Welcome to the wildest political story ever told, the complete saga of all 80 Roman emperors who ruled for over 500 years. We're talking about the ultimate mix of military genius and spectacular madness, family drama that makes reality TV look tame, and enough backstabbing to fuel 1,000 Netflix series. From Augustus, who built the greatest empire in history, to little Romulus Augustulus, who watched it all crumble. Each of these rulers shaped our world in ways we still feel today. So hit subscribe if you're ready for the craziest history lesson you've ever heard. And let's dive into 5 centuries of absolute power, absolute corruption, and absolutely unforgettable characters.
This is the episode 8, also the last of our long but definitely binge-worthy series on all 80 Roman emperors, where we explore the lives of emperors 71st to 80th. If you haven't watched the previous episodes on the first 70 Roman emperors, make sure you check it out in the pinned comment. Now, let's dive into our stories as we are inching toward the end of the Roman Empire.
From child restoration to imperial collapse, meet Emperor number 71, Valentinian III. This great-nephew of Honorius became Western Emperor at just 6 years old in 425 CE and ruled for 30 years until his assassination at 36 in 455, presiding over the Western Empire's final territorial losses while his mother and generals exercised real power. Placidus Valentinianus was installed by Eastern armies as the last representative of the Theodosian dynasty, ruling initially under his mother Galla Placidia's regency and later under the military dominance of Aetius, who controlled Western policy for decades while the emperor remained largely powerless to influence major decisions. His reign witnessed the complete loss of North Africa to Vandal conquest, continued barbarian settlement throughout Gaul and Spain, and Attila's devastating Hun invasions that required desperate alliances with former enemies to prevent total Western destruction. These territorial losses represented the permanent end of effective Roman control over most of the former Western Empire. The most significant moment was Aetius's victory over Attila at the Battle of Chalons in 451 CE, where a coalition of Romans and barbarian federates defeated the Hun Confederation in one of history's most important battles. This represented the Western Empire's last major military victory, achieved through cooperation with the same barbarian tribes that were simultaneously conquering Roman territories. His death in 455 CE came when he personally murdered Aetius during a palace meeting, allegedly declaring, "I am rid of my master." His assassination of the empire's most competent general was immediately followed by his own murder by Aetius's supporters, ending both the emperor and his victim in a spectacular act of political stupidity. Valentinian III had proven that late imperial emperors could be more dangerous to their own empire than external enemies, while his reign demonstrated the complete breakdown of effective governance during the Western Empire's final generation before its formal collapse.
From senatorial conspiracy to Vandal victim, meet Emperor number 72, Petronius Maximus. This wealthy aristocrat seized power at age 61 in March 455 CE after orchestrating Valentinian III's assassination,
but ruled for only 77 days before his own death during the chaos he'd helped create. Flavius Petronius Maximus represented the old Roman senatorial class, making one final grab for power, allegedly masterminding both Aetius's murder and Valentinian's subsequent assassination through carefully planned palace intrigue. His brief reign showed how traditional aristocratic wealth and connections could still influence imperial succession, at least temporarily. His desperate policies included trying to legitimize his rule by marrying Valentinian's widow and arranging his son's engagement to the late emperor's daughter, dynastic marriages that were supposed to provide constitutional continuity, but instead triggered the catastrophic Vandal invasion that would destroy both his reign and the city of Rome. The defining crisis came when Gaiseric's Vandal fleet approached Rome from North Africa, attracted by the political chaos and seeking revenge for the broken marriage alliance between his son and Valentinian's daughter. Petronius Maximus found himself completely unable to organize effective resistance against this sea-borne invasion. His death in May 455 CE came when Roman citizens murdered him during his attempted flight from the approaching Vandals, reportedly pelting him with stones as he tried to escape the city he was supposed to defend. His assassination by his own people demonstrated the complete collapse of imperial authority, when emperors prioritized personal survival over civic duty. Petronius Maximus had proven that traditional senatorial wealth and palace intrigue couldn't substitute for military competence during existential crises, while his death during Rome's third sack marked the effective end of meaningful imperial government in the Western territories. Have mercy on his soul, if he even has one. Whisper. Pay more attention to the audiobook version next time.
From Gallic aristocrat to barbarian puppet, meet Emperor number 73, Avitus. This provincial senator ruled from July 455 to October 456 CE, representing Visigothic attempts to control Western imperial succession through their preferred Roman clients, rather than allowing Eastern emperors to choose Western rulers. Eparchius Avitus was a Gallic aristocrat serving as Petronius Maximus's ambassador to the Visigothic court when news arrived of the emperor's death and Rome's sack by Vandals. King Theodoric II immediately proclaimed him emperor, demonstrating how barbarian kingdoms now directly controlled imperial appointments within their territorial spheres of influence. His reign controlled only southern Gaul and parts of Spain, representing the geographic reality that Roman emperors now governed whatever territories their barbarian allies permitted them to rule. His authority depended entirely on Visigothic military support rather than constitutional legitimacy, Eastern recognition, or popular acceptance. His attempt to assert independent authority by recruiting Germanic troops and marching on Italy led to immediate conflict with Ricimer, who commanded the remaining Roman military establishment and refused to accept barbarian-appointed emperors from peripheral provinces. This confrontation represented the collision between different concepts of imperial legitimacy. His death in 456 CE came after military defeat by Ricimer's forces, followed by forced abdication and subsequent murder, while attempting to return to his Gallic estates. His elimination demonstrated that even barbarian support couldn't guarantee survival against the Italian military establishment that still controlled some imperial resources.
Avitus had proven that regional imperial appointments were impossible without broader military control, while his brief reign illustrated how completely the Western Empire had fragmented into competing authorities, controlled by different barbarian confederations with conflicting interests and territorial ambitions.
From military competence to political murder, meet Emperor number 74, Majorian. This capable general ruled from 457 to 461 CE, representing the last serious attempt to restore effective Western imperial government through military reform and territorial recovery before his assassination ended hopes for imperial revival. Julius Valerius Majorianus had been appointed by the barbarian general Ricimer after Avitus's defeat, initially sharing power with his Germanic patron who controlled the Italian military establishment. His elevation represented hope that competent leadership could still achieve limited territorial recovery despite the Western Empire's catastrophic weakness and fragmentation. His extraordinary achievements included comprehensive military reforms that rebuilt Western armies, successful campaigns that recovered significant portions of Gaul from barbarian control, and administrative innovations that restored imperial finances through more efficient taxation and resource management. These accomplishments showed that effective government remained possible with proper leadership. The ambitious centerpiece of his restoration program was planning a massive naval expedition to reconquer Vandal North Africa, representing the most serious attempt at territorial recovery since the early 5th century. His strategy demonstrated realistic understanding of what imperial restoration would require, eliminating the Vandal threat that controlled the Mediterranean and raided Italian coasts at will. His death in 461 CE came through assassination by Ricimer's agents, who had grown suspicious of his independence and territorial ambitions. The murder occurred after the failed African expedition had weakened his political position, while his increasing autonomy threatened Ricimer's control over imperial policy and military appointments. Majorian had proven that individual competence and military reform could still achieve significant recovery, even during the empire's final phase, though his assassination demonstrated that barbarian power brokers wouldn't tolerate emperors who threatened their dominance over imperial institutions and territorial control.
From Majorian's assassination to Ricimer's puppet, meet Emperor number 75, Libius Severus. This nobody senator ruled from 461 to 465 CE, becoming emperor at around 50 and spending 4 years as the perfect example of what happens when barbarian generals decide they want emperors who will shut up, sit still, and sign whatever papers get put in front of them. Libius Severus Serpentius was basically Ricimer's answer to the Majorian problem. After murdering an emperor who'd gotten too independent and competent for his own good, the barbarian kingmaker needed someone who understood that emperor was now just a fancy word for guy who wears purple while someone else makes all the decisions. This career senator had spent decades perfecting the art of being forgettable, which turned out to be exactly the qualification Ricimer was looking for. His achievements included having absolutely no control over military policy, zero influence on territorial decisions, and the remarkable ability to remain completely irrelevant while the Western Empire continued falling apart around him. The Eastern Emperor Leo I refused to even recognize his legitimacy, which was probably the most honest assessment anyone made of his reign. He was basically a very expensive rubber stamp with imperial pretensions.
The guy's entire reign was spent watching Ricimer handle all the actual governing, while he presumably practiced looking imperial in mirrors and tried not to think about what had happened to his predecessor. His policies consisted mainly of agreeing with whatever Ricimer suggested and trying not to accidentally express any independent opinions that might get him killed. His death in 465 CE at age 54 was officially attributed to natural causes, though, given Ricimer's track record with emperors, natural causes probably meant naturally Ricimer got tired of him. His 4-year reign had proven that the position of Western Roman emperor had become completely ceremonial. Real power belonged to whoever commanded the armies. Libius Severus had demonstrated that survival as a late imperial emperor required the complete abandonment of any pretense to actual authority. His death would bring yet another experiment in finding someone willing to wear the crown. This time, the Eastern Empire would try sending their own candidate to see if outside appointment worked better than local puppet shows.
From Eastern intervention to Western disaster, meet Emperor number 76, Anthemius. This Byzantine aristocrat ruled from 467 to 472 CE, becoming emperor at around 50 when the Eastern Emperor Leo I decided to solve the Western puppet problem by sending his own candidate, which worked about as well as you'd expect when you try to impose foreign rulers on people who already hate being governed. Procopius Anthemius was Leo I's hand-picked solution to the Libius Severus embarrassment, representing the East's attempt to restore actual imperial government through competent appointment, rather than just letting Ricimer pick whatever senator seemed most compliant. His arrival in Italy came with Eastern military support and genuine administrative experience, plus the revolutionary idea that emperors should actually try to govern instead of just existing decoratively. His remarkable achievements included launching a massive joint Eastern-Western expedition against the Vandals in North Africa, negotiating with various barbarian kingdoms to stabilize territorial boundaries, and actually attempting to exercise real imperial authority despite Ricimer's obvious displeasure. The Vandal campaign was particularly ambitious, over 100,000 men and 1,000 ships, in what should have been the reconquest that restored Roman control over the Mediterranean. But everything went spectacularly wrong when the Vandal expedition failed catastrophically, burning through enormous resources while achieving absolutely nothing except proving that even coordinated Roman efforts couldn't overcome superior enemy tactics and weather. This military disaster destroyed his credibility while creating the financial crisis that would doom any hope of Western recovery. His death in 472 CE came when Ricimer's forces stormed Rome and captured him, leading to his execution after a brief siege that turned the capital into a battlefield. At around 55, he'd learned too late that Eastern backing meant nothing when your own military commander preferred puppet emperors to competent ones. Anthemius had proven that even genuine imperial competence and Eastern support couldn't overcome the fundamental problem that barbarian generals now controlled Western politics completely. His death would bring Ricimer's final attempt at emperor-making, though the kingmaker himself wouldn't live long enough to enjoy his victory. From Ricimer's last choice to natural survivor, meet Emperor number 77, Olybrius. This senatorial aristocrat ruled for just 4 months in 472 CE, becoming emperor at around 55 through the bizarre coincidence of being everybody's compromise candidate when the Western Empire's last kingmaker finally ran out of energy for political murders.
Anicius Olybrius had the unique qualification of being married to Valentinian III's daughter Placidia, giving him actual dynastic legitimacy that previous puppet emperors had completely lacked. Ricimer proclaimed him emperor immediately after murdering Anthemius, apparently deciding that family connections might work better than just picking random senators who promised to behave themselves during imperial ceremonies. His brief reign's most notable feature was presiding over Ricimer's death from natural causes just months after his appointment, creating the surreal situation where both the puppet emperor and his puppet master died within weeks of each other. This left the Western Empire without either ceremonial leadership or actual military control, which was probably an improvement over the previous arrangement. The defining irony of his time in power was that he finally achieved the imperial independence that had gotten his predecessors killed, but only because there was nobody left alive who cared enough to control him. His policies were presumably whatever seemed reasonable to a guy who suddenly found himself emperor of a collapsing state with no army, no money, and no clear successor to the barbarian general who'd been running everything. His death in November 472 CE from illness at around 56 meant he was the first emperor in decades to die peacefully in bed, rather than through assassination, civil war, or barbarian invasion. His 4-month reign had accomplished the remarkable feat of being completely uneventful during one of history's most chaotic periods. Olybrius had demonstrated that imperial survival was easiest when there was literally nobody left who wanted to control the emperor, though his natural death created yet another succession crisis. His passing would leave the empire in the hands of whoever could grab power first, and that turned out to be another barbarian general with his own ideas about puppet management.
From Burgundian puppet to peaceful retirement, meet Emperor number 78, Glycerius. This nephew of the previous emperor ruled from 473 to 474 CE, becoming emperor at around 45, when the barbarian general Gundobad decided he wanted his own imperial figurehead after Ricimer's death had left the puppet emperor business temporarily unmanaged. Flavius Glycerius was proclaimed by Gundobad, the Burgundian general who'd inherited Ricimer's position as Western military commander, representing the continued pattern of barbarian officers appointing Roman aristocrats to provide constitutional legitimacy for decisions they'd already made. His family connection to Olybrius probably helped, though his main qualification was being available when Gundobad needed someone to wear purple robes during official ceremonies. His brief reign accomplished the impressive feat of being completely ignored by almost everyone who mattered, including the Eastern Emperor Zeno, who refused recognition and was already planning to send his own candidate to replace this latest barbarian appointment. The Western Empire had become so irrelevant that different factions could proclaim competing emperors without anyone bothering to fight about it. The defining moment came when Julius Nepos arrived from the east with military backing, forcing Glycerius to abdicate, without any of the dramatic violence that had characterized previous imperial transitions. This peaceful transfer of power was probably the most civilized political event in the Western Empire for decades, though it mainly reflected how little the imperial title actually meant anymore. His remarkably gentle fate after deposition involved being appointed Bishop of Salona in Dalmatia, where he lived quietly for decades while his former empire completely collapsed around him. At around 46, when he lost the throne, he had achieved the unique distinction of being the only late Western emperor to survive his reign and enjoy a comfortable retirement. Glycerius had proven that imperial obscurity was actually the safest career path during the empire's final phase, though his peaceful abdication would bring the last Eastern attempt to restore legitimate government. His successor would discover that constitutional legitimacy still meant nothing when you couldn't control your own generals.
From Eastern legitimacy to Dalmatian exile, meet Emperor number 79, Julius Nepos. This nephew of a powerful general ruled from 474 to 475 CE in Italy, while continuing to claim the imperial title until his assassination in 480, representing the last serious attempt to restore constitutional government before the final collapse into pure military dictatorship. Flavius Julius Nepos was appointed by Eastern Emperor Zeno as the legitimate Western ruler, arriving with enough military backing to force Glycerius's peaceful abdication, while representing genuine hope that Eastern intervention could still restore effective imperial administration. At around 45, he brought both constitutional legitimacy and family connections to powerful military commanders who might actually support imperial authority. His most significant achievement was briefly restoring some semblance of actual imperial government in Italy, negotiating with various barbarian kingdoms while attempting to rebuild the administrative structures that had been completely neglected during decades of puppet rule. For about a year, it looked like competent leadership backed by Eastern support might actually stabilize the Western Empire's final territories. But everything collapsed when his own general, Orestes, rebelled in 475 CE, forcing Nepos to flee Italy for his family estates in Dalmatia, while Orestes installed his young son, Romulus Augustulus, as the new puppet emperor. This betrayal demonstrated that even Eastern backing and constitutional legitimacy meant nothing when your own military commanders decided they preferred their own family members wearing imperial purple. His assassination in 480 CE at around 50, while still claiming the imperial title in Dalmatia, officially ended any pretense that legitimate government could be restored through proper constitutional procedures. His death came 5 years after losing Italy, proving that being the real emperor meant nothing when you controlled no territory and commanded no armies. Julius Nepos had represented the final attempt to restore traditional imperial legitimacy through Eastern appointment and constitutional procedure, though his exile would leave the field clear for the ultimate puppet emperor. His overthrow brought to power a child whose reign would accidentally become history's most famous ending.
From child figurehead to history's end, meet our final emperor number 80, Romulus Augustulus. This 12-year-old boy became Western emperor in October 475 CE and was deposed in September 476 CE, earning the dubious distinction of being the last Western Roman emperor through the simple accident of ruling when the final collapse finally occurred. Flavius Romulus Augustus was proclaimed emperor by his father Orestes, who had rebelled against Julius Nepos and needed a legitimate figurehead to justify his military coup. His original name, Romulus, ironically recalled Rome's legendary founder, while the diminutive Augustulus, Little Augustus, perfectly captured his powerless position as a child puppet in adult political games. His brief reign represented the complete triumph of barbarian control over Roman institutions, with Germanic federates commanding all military forces while traditional administrative structures maintained purely ceremonial functions. The empire had become a constitutional fiction, preserved for diplomatic convenience rather for actual governance over meaningful territories. The end came in September 476 CE, when Odoacer, leading Germanic troops demanding land grants in Italy, deposed the child emperor and sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople. This action formally ended Western imperial government, though effective Roman control had been lost decades earlier to barbarian kingdoms throughout the former provinces. His fate after deposition was remarkably gentle for such dramatic historical circumstances. Odoacer granted him a pension and allowed retirement to a villa in Campania, where he disappeared from historical records entirely. The last Western emperor thus avoided the violent death that had claimed most of his predecessors. Romulus Augustulus had the unique distinction of ending what Augustus had begun over 5 centuries earlier, though the collapse was inevitable regardless of who held the meaningless title during those final months. His deposition marked the formal conclusion of the Western Roman Empire, though the Eastern Empire would continue as Byzantium for another 1,000 years.
Phew! There you have it. Every single piece of history about the 80 Roman emperors. If you made it through all 80 of these lunatics, drop a comment about which emperor you'd least want as your boss, smash that subscribe button, and remember, absolute power corrupts absolutely, but it makes for fantastic entertainment. And that's the end of our imperial story. From Augustus building the greatest empire in history to little Romulus getting a nice retirement package from his barbarian replacements. Not bad for 503 years of mostly winging it. Look, we've learned that running an empire is basically impossible. Half these emperors got murdered by people they trusted, a quarter went completely nuts with power, and the rest were just trying not to get killed long enough to fix the roads. We had philosopher emperors who couldn't handle real-world problems, military geniuses who couldn't handle politics, and politicians who couldn't handle barbarians showing up uninvited. The Western Empire didn't collapse in some epic final battle. It was more like a really slow-motion car crash where everyone could see it coming, but nobody could figure out how to hit the brakes. By the end, Germanic tribes were basically doing all the work anyway, so they just took over management. But here's the thing. Roman ideas about how to organize society, build stuff that lasts, and create laws that make sense, that never died. It just moved to Constantinople and spread everywhere else too. These 80 crazy people accidentally created the foundation of Western civilization.